We know that food prices are still stubbornly high. I just met with families here for whom paying the bills is not always easy. As they told me, groceries remain a huge part of their budget.
Drowning in debt, more Canadians are watching their cost of living climb while depending on credit cards to survive. And as CTV's Colton Prale tells us, there are new warnings from the Bank of Canada.
If you are the 30-year-old stuck living in your parents' basements because the Liberals have doubled housing prices, if you can't fill up your tank with gas, if you're among the 4 in 5 families that have cut their diets because they can't afford food, the last thing you would want is a tax hike on your paycheck and on your energy use. Will the Liberals therefore cancel those tax hikes?
Today, new real estate rules for mortgages and home down payments in Canada take effect. The federal government's key measures include raising the cap on insured mortgages from $1 to $1.5 million.
What if the Canadian dream is no longer a dream but a nightmare? For decades, Canada was seen as a land of opportunity, a place where families could thrive, where anyone willing to work hard could secure a future, and where the quality of life was among the best in the world. But today, for millions of people, that promise is slipping further and further out of reach. In this video, we're diving deep into why living in Canada has become almost impossible. Skyrocketing housing prices, a relentless cost of living crisis, and a faltering immigration system have combined to create a perfect storm. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are everyday realities shaping the lives of millions of Canadians. Families are struggling to pay rent, young people are giving up on the dream of owning a home, and immigrants, once warmly welcomed, are now being scapegoated for systemic issues. But we're not just here to rant, we're here to understand. How did Canada, a country admired for its progressive policies and high standard of living, find itself in this position? What led to these crises? And what needs to change to stop this downward spiral? After all, this is about more than just Canada's challenges. It's about what kind of country Canada wants to be. Let's get started. The housing crisis? Let's start with a question. How much would you be willing to pay to keep a roof over your head? In Canada, it seems the answer is more than ever before. Over the past decade, the housing crisis has reached unprecedented levels, making homeownership and even renting a distant dream for many. Let's take Toronto, for instance. Just 2 years ago, the average rent for a modest 2-bedroom apartment was $2,400. Today, it's $3,300, an increase of nearly 40%. Vancouver tells a similar story, with housing prices skyrocketing to levels that would make even New York City residents do a double take. Across Canada, owning a home is no longer just a challenge. It's an unattainable fantasy for the majority. The roots of this crisis run deep. For decades, Canada enjoyed a reputation as a place where the middle class could thrive. But now, a perfect storm of government inaction, speculative real estate investments, and rapid population growth has made housing a luxury rather than a necessity. The real cost of affordable housing? A 2-bedroom rental isn't the only thing that's out of reach. For those looking to buy, the picture is just as bleak. In Toronto or Vancouver, you'd need a 6-figure income, double or even triple the median household income, to qualify for a mortgage on an average-priced home. And that's not even factoring in the soaring interest rates that have made borrowing more expensive than ever. This disparity leaves young Canadians and families trapped in a frustrating cycle. Pay exorbitant rent for subpar accommodations or move far away from job opportunities in urban centers, only to face long commutes and other expenses. Students, one of the most vulnerable groups, are particularly hard hit. Stories of 25 students crammed into a single basement in Brampton highlight the severity of the crisis. So, how did we get here? One significant factor is population growth, outpacing the construction of new housing. Immigration policies aimed at boosting the workforce have brought millions of new residents, but infrastructure development hasn't kept up. For every new family arriving, there's a growing shortage of available homes, creating fierce competition for limited options. Speculative investments also play a critical role. Real estate has become a favored asset for both domestic and international investors, driving prices even higher. Foreign buyers snapping up properties and leaving them vacant have turned homes into investment vehicles rather than living spaces. In many urban neighborhoods, the lights are off because nobody lives there. Government response? The Canadian government has promised solutions, but their actions have often fallen short. Housing ministers have come and gone, each with plans that failed to deliver results. More recently, the government has acknowledged its role in exacerbating the crisis, but the road to recovery is long and uncertain. Even measures like the Housing Affordability Fund or rent caps seem like band-aid solutions to a gaping wound. Experts say Canada would need to build at least 5.8 million new homes in the next 10 years just to meet current demand. But achieving that requires overcoming regulatory barriers, labor shortages, and skyrocketing construction costs. The housing crisis isn't just about numbers. It's about real people struggling to find stability. It's about families forced to choose between housing and other essentials, like food and healthcare. It's about students living in unsafe conditions and a generation unable to envision a future in their own country. Canada's housing market has gone from being a cornerstone of opportunity to a crushing weight on its residents. In this battle between supply and demand, it's the average Canadian who's losing. The cost of living? Canada has always been known as a land of opportunity, but today it seems more like a land of sacrifices. Beyond the housing crisis, there's a second layer of financial hardship that's choking Canadians: the skyrocketing cost of living. From groceries to cell phone bills, the everyday essentials are eating up paychecks faster than they come in. Imagine paying $10 for a loaf of bread or $11 for a small bag of apples. These aren't luxury items, they're staples. Yet for many Canadians, such costs are becoming the norm. Cell phone bills in Canada are among the highest in the world. A standard 4G plan with 100 gigabytes of data costs an eye-watering $144 a month. For comparison, that same plan is just $70 across the border in the US. So, what's the problem? Why are Canadians paying so much for so little? Wages stuck in the past? If the cost of living is on the rise, then surely wages are increasing to meet those demands, right? Wrong. Many immigrants and even longtime residents are shocked to discover just how low wages are in Canada. Compared to the United States, salaries in Canada often fall short, leaving many working multiple jobs just to stay afloat. Consider this testimony from an Australian immigrant. I'm earning less in a full-time job here than I did in a part-time job back home when I was 17. This isn't an isolated experience. Across forums and social media, similar stories paint a picture of a labor market that simply isn't keeping up with the demands of daily life. As wages stagnate, poverty levels are climbing. 1 in 7 Canadians, roughly 4.9 million people, lives below the poverty line. And precarious employment, jobs without stability or benefits, has risen by nearly 50% in the past 2 decades. Taxes that don't deliver. Adding insult to injury, Canadians are hit with some of the highest taxes in the world. In theory, those taxes are supposed to fund universal health care, public infrastructure, and other social services that make life more affordable. But in practice, many feel they're not getting what they're paying for. Take healthcare, for example. A 3-year wait to get a family doctor? That's the reality for many Canadians today. Waiting times to see specialists can stretch to over a year, and emergency rooms often leave patients sitting for hours before they're seen. When healthcare systems falter, people expect their tax dollars to fix it. Instead, frustration grows as the government offers vague explanations and limited solutions. And what about infrastructure? Roads in many areas are crumbling, and public transit projects are years behind schedule. With little visible return on their tax investments, Canadians are left wondering, where is all the money going? A country divided? The cost of living crisis isn't just an economic issue. It's a social one. It's creating deep divides between those who can afford to live comfortably and those who are struggling to survive. For many, Canada's promise of equality and opportunity feels more like a cruel joke. Some might say, if you don't like it, leave. But for millions of Canadians, leaving isn't an option. They're tied to their families, their jobs, and their communities. The question isn't whether they should leave, it's whether Canada can fix the problems that are forcing so many into financial desperation. In a nation known for its progressive values and high quality of life, the rising cost of living is eroding trust in the system. From low wages to soaring prices and high taxes, the strain on everyday Canadians is impossible to ignore. If Canada doesn't address these issues soon, the cost of living won't just be a strain, it'll be the breaking point. Immigration policies? For decades, Canada has proudly declared itself a nation of immigrants. Its immigration policies have been hailed as a model for the world, attracting skilled workers and fostering diversity. But in recent years, this strength has become a source of strain, with immigration policies facing backlash and public opinion turning against them. How did this happen? And why has immigration, a cornerstone of Canada's identity, become such a contentious issue? A history of success. Canada's immigration story is one of ambition and progress. In the mid-20th century, the country developed its innovative points-based system, selecting newcomers based on their education, work experience, and language skills. This system made Canada a beacon for skilled professionals worldwide and helped fuel economic growth. But the system wasn't just about economics, it was about vision. Canada's leaders saw immigration as a tool to solve long-term challenges, from building the Western provinces in the 19th century to addressing worker shortages in the modern era. The population surge? In 2022, the Canadian government unveiled a bold plan to increase immigration levels dramatically. The goal was to welcome 465,000 new permanent residents in 2023, 485,000 in 2024, and a staggering 500,000 in 2025. These numbers would position Canada as a leader in the global race for talent, particularly in high-demand sectors like healthcare, technology, and skilled trades. However, this surge came with unintended consequences: overcrowded cities, longer waiting times for essential services, and mounting frustration among citizens and immigrants alike. Public opinion, once overwhelmingly supportive of immigration, began to shift. Immigration becomes a flashpoint. In 2018, 2/3 of Canadians believed immigration was a net positive for the country. By 2024, that number had plummeted. Over half of Canadians now say immigration is contributing to the housing crisis and straining public resources. This shift in opinion came to a head in 2024 when protests erupted across the country. The protests weren't just about immigration. They were about affordability, fairness, and the government's ability to manage a growing population. For the first time, immigration became a deeply polarizing issue in Canada. The government's response? Facing growing discontent, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced a 21% reduction in immigration targets starting in 2025. The new quotas aim to stabilize population growth and ease pressure on housing and services. But many critics argue this move is too little, too late. Some see the reduction as an admission of failure. Others view it as a betrayal of Canada's values as a welcoming nation. Meanwhile, immigrants themselves often feel unfairly blamed for problems they didn't create. The government's approach has also exposed deeper flaws in the system. Despite ambitious immigration goals, the backlog of residency applications reached 2 million in 2023. Temporary residents, including international students and workers, have doubled in number since 2022, adding further strain to already overwhelmed housing and service infrastructures. Politics and governance? It's one thing to face economic and social challenges, but when people start losing faith in their government, it can feel like the ground beneath them is crumbling. In Canada, political mismanagement and a series of controversies have left many questioning whether the country's leadership is capable of steering the ship out of turbulent waters. A legacy of scandals? Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came into office in 2015 with soaring approval ratings and promises of transparency, fairness, and progress. But nearly a decade later, his administration has been plagued by scandals that have eroded public trust. From the SNC-Lavalin affair, where Trudeau was accused of political interference in a corruption case, to the WE Charity controversy, where the government awarded a lucrative contract to an organization with ties to Trudeau's family, These episodes have painted a picture of a government that isn't always playing by the rules. These scandals aren't just political gossip, they're symptoms of a larger problem. For many Canadians, they represent a government that seems disconnected from the struggles of everyday people. Media control and perceived propaganda? Adding fuel to the fire is the perception that Canada's media landscape has become a mouthpiece for the government. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, receives over $1 billion annually in public funding, leading critics to accuse it of biased reporting. Independent voices and alternative viewpoints often get drowned out, leaving many Canadians feeling like they're only getting one side of the story. This perception reached a boiling point during the 2022 trucker protests, where the government invoked the Emergencies Act to crack down on demonstrators. Bank accounts of protesters and even donors were frozen, sparking outrage at what many saw as an overreach of power. While some supported the government's actions, others saw it as a chilling example of authoritarian tendencies creeping into Canadian politics. A divided nation? As trust in the government wanes, Canada is becoming increasingly polarized. On one side are those who still believe in Trudeau's progressive vision for the country. On the other hand, there are those who feel left behind by policies that seem to prioritize idealism over practicality. This division is evident in public sentiment. Trudeau's approval ratings have hit record lows, with only 33% of Canadians supporting his leadership as of September 2024. The hashtag #TrudeauMustGo trended across social media platforms, reflecting widespread frustration. But the problem isn't just Trudeau, it's the system itself. Critics argue that Canada's centralized political structure gives the federal government too much power, allowing decisions to be made without sufficient input from provinces or citizens. A government on the defensive? Facing mounting pressure, Trudeau's administration has tried to address public concerns, particularly around housing and immigration. The appointment of former Immigration Minister Sean Fraser as Housing Minister is one such effort. But for many, these measures feel like too little, too late. Fraser's track record hasn't inspired confidence. Critics argue that the same policies that created the housing crisis can't be expected to solve it. The path forward? Canada's political challenges are not insurmountable, but they require a fundamental shift in how the government approaches leadership and governance. Transparency, accountability, and a focus on pragmatic solutions are essential to restoring trust. Without these changes, the growing divide between citizens and their leaders will only deepen, making it even harder to tackle the country's pressing issues. In a time when Canada desperately needs strong leadership, many are left wondering, is the government up to the task? If trust isn't rebuilt soon, the political erosion may become just as crippling as the housing and cost of living crises themselves. Societal shifts? Canada has long been celebrated for its cultural diversity, progressive values, and reputation as one of the most inclusive countries in the world. But beneath the surface, societal tensions are simmering. From debates over liberal policies to concerns about cultural shifts, many Canadians are feeling the strain of living in a country that seems increasingly divided. Cultural liberalism, progress or polarization? Canada's liberal policies have often been a point of pride, attracting immigrants and fostering inclusivity. However, in recent years, some feel that the pendulum has swung too far. Debates over issues like gender identity, education, and freedom of expression have created sharp divides. For example, controversies like the one involving a teacher in Ontario who gained media attention for wearing extreme prosthetics in the classroom sparked heated debates about what constitutes appropriate behavior in schools. Supporters argue that Canada's commitment to non-discrimination is admirable, while critics claim it reflects a lack of boundaries and accountability. These debates often spill over into larger societal discussions, with some parents voicing concerns about the content of school curriculums, particularly around topics of gender and sexuality. Others see these policies as essential for fostering a more inclusive society. The result is a nation caught between two worldviews, one that champions progressive change and another that fears losing traditional values. shifting social dynamics? The social fabric of Canada's cities is also undergoing a transformation. Urban areas, especially major hubs like Toronto and Vancouver, are often described as cold and impersonal. Immigrants and longtime residents alike report struggles with forming meaningful connections in communities that feel increasingly transactional. Some immigrants share stories of loneliness and difficulty adjusting to cultural norms, while younger Canadians express frustrations over what they perceive as superficial and disconnected social interactions. What was once seen as a welcoming and friendly culture is now being critiqued for its lack of warmth and community. The cost of division. These cultural tensions aren't just theoretical, they have real consequences. The polarization between progressive and conservative values, between urban and rural areas, and between new immigrants and longtime residents is creating divisions that threaten Canada's social cohesion. Public discourse has become increasingly hostile, with debates often devolving into name-calling and accusations. Critics of liberal policies are branded as intolerant, while advocates for tradition are accused of being stuck in the past. This climate of polarization makes it harder to have productive conversations about the issues that matter most. Moving forward, Canada's identity has always been built on balance, a balance between progress and tradition, inclusion and individualism. But that balance is being tested like never before. To move forward, Canadians must find ways to bridge these divides and foster a sense of unity in diversity. This means addressing not just the policy issues, but the cultural challenges that are shaping the nation. It means creating spaces for open, respectful dialogue and recognizing that progress doesn't have to come at the expense of tradition. Canada's strength has always been its ability to adapt and evolve. But as societal shifts create new challenges, the country must work harder than ever to ensure that its values remain a source of unity rather than division. Canada, a country once celebrated for its prosperity, inclusivity, and high quality of life, is now facing a series of crises that threaten its very identity. From unaffordable housing to the skyrocketing cost of living, from strained immigration policies to a growing mistrust in government, the challenges are mounting. For many, the Canadian dream feels further out of reach than ever before. What went wrong? At its core, the problem isn't just one thing. It's a perfect storm of policy missteps, economic pressures, and societal shifts. The truth is, these problems didn't appear overnight, and they won't be solved quickly. But they can be solved if the right actions are taken. This means bold reforms in housing policy, smarter economic strategies, and a more balanced approach to immigration. It means holding leaders accountable and fostering a culture of transparency and trust. Above all, it means rebuilding the sense of community and shared purpose that has always been Canada's greatest strength. Because no matter how daunting the challenges may seem, Canada has the resources, the talent, and the resilience to overcome them. As we move into 2025 and beyond, one thing is clear: the status quo isn't working. If Canada wants to remain a place where people can live, thrive, and dream, it needs to start making some hard choices. For the millions of Canadians struggling to get by, those changes can't come soon enough. Thank you for watching, and if you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring important stories like this to light and keeps these conversations going. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.